this moment, we'll talk normally, and we'll introduce the episode.
Do you want leg slap again?
Do I need to leg slap again? I think we're all right, aren't we? Yeah.
Okay, yeah, so...
Yeah. Producer Lou's happy. We don't need to leg slap again.
Fair enough.
Okay.
I'm getting quite self-conscious about the whole leg slapping scenario. Do you know what I mean?
Just go away and practice this.
Possibly. I'll do it in my own time. Bit of research. David, Leah, hello.
Hey.
How are we?
How you doing? I'm all good, thank you.
Good, Leah.
I'm all good as well.
Good. It's good to know. It's good to hear. It's good to see you in this place this morning.
Good to hear. Good to see you.
Good to hear. Good to see you.
In this place.
In this place.
You mean the office?
I mean the studio.
The studio. Is that what we're calling it now?
Yeah. Well,
Fair
I
enough.
start to call it the studio. When the microphones are on, it's the studio.
The studio, fair enough. Yeah,
Makes me
this big
feel a
studio.
bit like a bit of a pro. Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like we've come into the studio. We're in the studio. Oh,
Yeah.
I can't talk. Sorry, I'm in the studio. Those type of scenarios. Do you know what I mean? And I think it gives the listeners a little peek behind the curtain and a little sense of.
They realise it's all a facade.
It's a massive facade. We shouldn't have put the camera on. That's the problem, isn't it?
Peek behind the curtain, you know what happens in Wizards of Oz. It's not a real wizard.
It's not. No. Oh God. They've seen. Anyway. Before we get
sorry.
sidetracked again,
Yeah.
and I will take my fair share of the blame for allowing us to become sidetracked. Let's get on with today's episode. Leah, tell us about your patient.
So my patient was from yesterday. So it came to me as a call. So I've got a calls list on a Monday and Wednesday in this place, and all the calls list had underneath it was patient wants to discuss medicines following a recent blood test. So first thing I did was look at what blood test it was, and it was for a thyroid blood test, and a thyroid stimulating hormone, or TSH, was 124. So I think off the top of my head, it should be between 0.27 and 4.2. So hers was 124.
Say that again. It should be between what?
0.27
Yeah.
and 4.2.
Uh-huh.
Hers was 124.
Crikey.
Yeah, so it's like, I don't even know the
That's
maths
probably
behind
the-
how
yeah.
much higher the
That's
upper
a
limit
lot
than
higher.
it was. Yeah, so
Blimey.
immediately I'm like, okay, this is not
Yeah.
going to be a simple phone call. So she was on thyroxine 100 microgram 2 a day, so 200 microgram total daily dose, and had been on that for like at least 2 years, I think. She was 72. So obviously I was like, okay, the first thing I need to look or talk to her about is if she's compliant with the medicines, because sometimes when patients aren't compliant with the thyroxine, that can sometimes lead to their TSH being raised. And I thought it was just going to be a conversation about compliance and things like that. But then I noticed there was a consult from one of the GPs that had occurred the week before about the blood tests as well. So I was like, I wasn't
The same
sure.
ones that you'd seen.
Yeah, like I don't know why and then I was like, okay, why am I getting this phone call again? Has there been something happened in that week? Or did she need something explaining again that the GP had discussed? But I looked at the consult, and from the consult, it seemed as though the patient, from the GP's perspective, was being very vague about the thyroxine and whether she was taking it or not. It just said a comment about the patient was saying that she was getting her medicines in bits and bobs. She wasn't getting a Zopiclone, which she was struggling with her sleep with. And it kept it wasn't sort of going linear with the conversation. It was just like she'd go off on certain tangents, not focusing on what the GP had rang her for. And then when the GP had asked her, oh, can you go and get the boxes of medicines and just confirm to me what the dose was that you were taking, she just kept saying, oh, the boxes are upstairs, but never going to get the boxes. So the GP couldn't really confirm whether she was taking the right amount, taking the 2 tablets or taking a different dose, and that's why the bloods were out of range. So the conversation sort of ended with the GP thought, does she need blister packs to help with compliance, and was going to book her for bloods in the next 6 to 8 weeks after she'd started taking the meds regularly in her eyes. But then when I rang her, it was a case of I'd noticed that she started mentioning about the bits and bobs situation again. All these issues started when I started getting bits and bobs of medicine. So I was like, what does this mean, bits and bobs? And then it turned out we'd, as per practice policy, we'd reduced her medicine quantity because she hadn't been for her annual blood tests.
Right, okay.
But then it turned out that we'd reduced the quantity back in March 2022
Oh, crazy.
originally. So there was 2 weeks supply from March 2022, but she'd been ordering it monthly. And then it got to October 2022, and she'd been put on weekly, but was ordering it monthly. So this is what she meant by weekly, like, bits and bobs.
So she was ordering it once a month and getting once a week's worth.
Yeah.
Right.
And it had been, like, multiple people had been issuing it, but she'd had, like, the first I was like, oh God, like, have we not picked up on the fact that she's getting these like weekly quantities for God knows how many months? But then it turned out that she'd had, like, I counted up 12 interactions, so that's like people ringing her. Like, I'd flagged it to on-call GP when she put the request in and just say, like, listen, I'm not really comfortable continuing this supply because we've tried to get her in for these blood tests and she's just not, in my eyes, coming in for them. And it seemed like she'd book in for the blood test every time that she'd have a conversation with someone about it. But then she also had arthritis, being 72 as well, and her mobility had sort of gotten worse. And she had asthma as well. And there was always like a pattern of whenever she'd go and like try and get the blood tests, she'd have to then, she was telling me, cancel them because either her mobility wasn't great and she couldn't get out to go and get them, or her asthma would kick off.
Right,
and she'd panic. She'd then go into like a panic attack of, I can't go and get my bloods done. I can't leave the house. But then we'd also offered her at one point, I think in April of this year, home blood tests to like try and make it a bit easier. And then she declined them because she said, oh, I don't want to waste anyone's time with them coming out to me. And I was just like, okay, trying to get to the bottom of like, what can we do for you today that like obviously helps you out in the future to make this not happen again? And she was like, I'm still taking the tablets regularly though. And I was like, no, but you
can't
how
be.
can you have,
Yeah.
how can you have took them if you're only getting weekly amounts? So first of all, I explained to her why the bits and bobs situation was happening. Like obviously we need to get your bloods done for this reason of, we wouldn't have known that your thyroid would have been out of range if you hadn't attended for this blood test.
Can I just ask?
Yeah, go.
Explain to me what the risks or what the potential repercussions are of her TSH being so high.
Being out of range?
Yeah.
Let me just get her up here. So...
Yeah, so it's like, with your TSH, like, is
like
thyroid stimulating hormone, is that's what it means. So it's like your body sort of like has a thyroid gland and it releases like this thyroid hormone to regulate sort of different systems within your body. So like hypothyroidism is sort of like where you have like weight gain you tend to have. It's quite like makes you a bit like sluggish, whereas like hyper, which is when you've got too much thyroid flying around, is when you have sort of like weight loss and stuff like that sort of thing. So you're like more excited, your body's more excited. It's always like running on a higher level.
Right, okay, so it's burning through your energy. And presumably then if it makes you lose weight, if the patient's already got arthritis, she's
it's just not good.
If it's sort of suggesting that like you've got a high TSH, so that's a thyroid stimulating hormone, that means that you've got like low amounts of thyroid in circulation because your body's like challenging itself to be like, oh my god, it seems like that's the highest I think I've ever heard that anyone's TSH is. I probably
1, 2, 4. Well, the highest range is the 4.2. So it's God knows how many times higher than the average.
I would have like fallen off my chair. I think if I'd seen that personally.
Interestingly, as well, like then I started looking at, has it always been like, is this just like it's once it's being raised, or has it been like a pattern? And just getting it up now, she'd basically always had this like high TSH as well, and I was like, how is this not being
going back how far?
So I've got back as far. The first time it got done as raised was December 2015. It was 94. 2016, 97.
Wow.
18 was 95.
Is someone missing a decimal point out?
I know. 2019, 157. September 2020 was when the previous bloods before these recent ones was 75. So it's always been above reference range, but why no one has like flagged it?
Surely that's like secondary care should sort of hopefully have some involvement.
I know. So that was like because when I ultimately went to one of the GPs to discuss it in the end, because I was like, I'm not comfortable like leaving it as just I've come to you discussing bloods, but
Yeah.
Then she started saying, like, I was like, okay, I'm just going to ask you some questions about if you experiencing like symptoms of the hypothyroidism. She was listing every symptom. She was like, oh, well, the main reason I wanted the call today was I've got constipation. And I was like, tick, that's one of the things. Tired all the time. That's why she wanted the Zopiclone to like sort of help regulate sleep. She was feeling weak and achy, depressed before I rang her as well. Sensitivity to the cold, muscle cramping, and I was like, yeah, this is not like her eyesight going as well. Like her eyesight was going.
do we think then that the likelihood is that she's never been taking a medication?
I haven't got a clue like how she could have been taking it regularly if it's always been
that high,
a weekly from monthly or something.
Yeah, exactly.
To my mind, I think if it's 124 now, and what was it, 157?
That was in
2019 or something.
2019, 157, yeah.
The peak, like they're not, that they're really high, and they're sort of similarly high. So it would suggest to me that whatever it is that's happening now was probably happening then as well. Like whatever's happening hasn't changed.
Shocked, like she hasn't had such severe consequence of having such high TSH. And I was like, okay, this needs nipping in the bud now. Like, can't carry on. I don't want to leave the conversation. But she kept saying to me, when I tried to get her on for a call with the GP and explain why I thought she needed a call, the concerns about it. Yeah. She was like, oh, I've got friends coming over, so I don't really want to discuss the medicines whilst they're there. I was like, yeah, but you're not understanding, like, you're in a severe situation right now. You have been for God knows how long. This needs sorting. I managed to sway her to get a call the next day. Went and spoke to the GP about it beforehand as well, just to explain, like, because it was the one that already spoke to her on the 7th, the week before. Okay. She was like, oh God, this doesn't sound like she's been taking her meds anyway. But, so she, in the end, we had a conversation for about 25 minutes, and the other issues were, like, sort of raised as to why, obviously, she couldn't go for the blood test and things. And she was like, oh, like, I've just been feeling, like, really lonely and depressed as well. Like, other things came about from the conversation. She's like, I've got family and stuff, but, like, obviously I still feel lonely and I don't know why and things like that. And I was like, okay, there's other things going on here. The main thing I wanted to do was obviously get your thyroid symptoms sorted out. So I said, like, what from today would be a peace of mind for you? Like, what would make you get your bloods checked more regularly and compliance? She said, the blister pack suggestion was a good one. So we were going to chase up on obviously getting her blister packs, and home blood tests would be beneficial for her because her mobility is like gotten worse now. Yeah. So I've put a note on to say anytime she needs bloods, domiciliary bloods. Yeah. And she's getting a blister pack. So that's sort of boxed off, and she was very appreciative of that. She understood why we'd reduced her and things like that. I didn't, after the conversation, I was just like, I felt very to blame because I was the one that reduced it based on practice policy of her not going in. But when she was saying about like, oh, I'd book them, but then things would happen where I couldn't go. I felt a bit like I should have maybe done a bit more to like try and get them done, because I'd felt like reducing her meds had then caused her to have the bloods that she did have and caused her to have them symptoms.
It's interesting really, because I presume, I mean, the reducing the quantities down is pretty standard fare across all the practices that we work with, and it's something that we teach our pharmacists internally as well. And I mean, you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but the idea is you kind of inconvenience the patient in order to be able to nudge them into getting their bloods done. You make it more difficult to get what they need, so you make them go and do it. And I can see how for certain patients that would be a worthwhile tactic. People who are being almost resistant or just won't engage or whatever it is. Yeah. But I was actually having a conversation with one of our other pharmacists about this. I don't want to call it technique, but this
like a
process, and I was like, do you reckon it actually works? Like, has anyone ever actually ran some data and looked to see if it actually works? Because I mean, we could almost certainly do it. We could run searches and audit it and see, does it actually improve compliance and compliance with monitoring? Because I'm just not convinced that it does. And I'm saying that having also not done any digging on it, but I hear, I guess my feeling on it is like, if it worked, then we wouldn't have to do it so often. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And I'm just not, I know it's standard fare, and I know everyone does that, and I get the logic behind it, and I think in some scenarios it works, but I think this scenario that you've described for us, Lee, and I think is a perfect example of...
It's not.
And that might be the exception that proves the rule. It may well be. And there will always be outliers to these things. You can't possibly create a process that covers everybody. It's just not possible. And you have to try and get something that suits the biggest number of people. Mm-hmm. But I always wonder if it does work. I'm not saying it doesn't, because you know, I'm sure that there is some reason why it's being used so widely. But I would love for someone to do some digging and just see if there is any evidence to suggest that it actually works, or whether, you know, if you identified, let's just say, I mean, the surgery you're working there was about 6,000-7,000 patients. Was it more than that? Yeah. So let's say it's 7,000 patients. So on average, normally it's about half the patient population is on repeat medication. So that's 3,500 people. And let's just say it's 10% of that 3,500 are you difficult to get in for monitoring patients. So that's 350 people. And let's say we're spending our time reducing that down. Now, when you reduce the patient's meds down from monthly to 2 weekly to weekly to 3 days, whatever it is, you're also increasing the workload that's required by the clinicians to process those scripts. So if you're doing it on a weekly basis, what would become one prescription becomes 4 for a month because it's 4 weeks. Yeah. Would it be better to think about how do we communicate better with the patients to explain why they need the monitoring, but also understand why they're not going for their monitoring as well? And would that be a more worthwhile exercise than reducing the quantities down? I don't know.
She'd had that conversation like at least, like I say, 12 times, where I checked through every single time. She'd had an interaction where I'd put it on like this prescription, I'd put it on a GP list, like, can you just give her a call? I haven't got a chance today, but I'm not comfortable issuing it. Someone had always rang her, discussed it. And she said she'd had like family members and stuff going around every day. And I'm like, how do you still have that conversation of the importance of going for the blood and still not attend for it? But then she seemed, just discussing with her, that she seemed the type of person that didn't want to ask for much help. She'd just try and do things on her own, and the fact that she felt...
It's a bit of a generational thing, then, isn't it?
She felt lonely and stuff with even though having family around and things. It just felt like she was that type of patient who wouldn't tell us that she needed...
I don't want to bother anyone.
What I was saying about the first time we offered a home blood test, and she was like, I'm not that worse off though, like there's other people that need that service, so I don't want to take that away from someone else. And I think in the end, when I was like, no, but you need to... What would help you? Because obviously you can't even worry about these people if you're not right yourself. You can't like...
what other people need is not your concern. Do
you know
what I mean? I know that's... I know someone's trying to be...
It was a weird, like, bittersweet moment, because at the end of it, she appreciated the call very much, and she was like, "Oh, you've made me day. Like, I was depressed before you called me, but now I feel like reassured and stuff that you've made an effort to like adapt to my needs and things." But then I feel like the one that's caused the situation by reducing the meds.
But I certainly don't think that's the case. Go on, David, you were going to say something there.
Yeah. It was just like your point and stuff like this is like reducing the meds and stuff like that. So I say, in my experience, like anecdotally, it's sort of like I would say it works because I'm always changing them back, which is like quite a pain in the cheeks, to put it politely. It's just like having to go back and be like, all right, so now I have to go into individually 8 different meds and change them from one,
delete the
from
message.
2 weeks, delete messages, change them from 1 or 2 weeks to a 4 month, and then just like the little message, can you change this patient wants this back to this because they've now got their bloods done, and I'm like, happy days. Yeah. Probably. If they didn't want me, patient's annoyed that we reduced it. Yes. Well, that is pretty much that is perfect.
That's exactly what our job was.
That job well done there, because they've gone and they've done what we wanted them to, is get their meds done, get their bloods done. So we can like monitor meds, because it is an important part of like the healthcare system sort of thing, especially for repeat medication, and patients may not understand the necessity for it and the importance of it. It's like a big safety thing, so we need to be, and to be honest, to make sure the medicine's working, because this lady clearly
for example, if
there's no way of knowing, is there? There was no way of, even if the monitoring is probably, when finally gone for the monitoring, it's showing that it either isn't working or she isn't taking it, but something's not working.
Mm-hmm. Some process doesn't work, and like it's identified potential compliance issues that now have been potentially sorted with the blister packs, and maybe that will help her with compliance and help the bloods. But if that's the case of she now understands the importance again of going for the bloods, she does act compliant with them, and it's still raised, then obviously we need to look at referral on to specialists, because the dose is quite high. Like, it's the highest I've seen without specialist input. I think we usually refer people who are, I usually don't tend to go above the dose 150. I don't know about you, but without referring on.
I think maybe 250 or something like that. I think
That's
I've seen.
I've
I
like
wouldn't raise it up, but like I have seen it on repeat meds and stuff like that. You'd see like they're usually under sort of like the specialists and stuff like that. But I don't know. I think realistically you've done what I would do, and like what pretty much every, like, do you know what I mean? Everyone here is like, that's sort of the system we follow. We go, patient hasn't been for bloods, we need to try and encourage them to go for bloods, so we would reduce that quantity down. Unfortunately, it's one of those things where, you know, potentially she has slipped through the net, but it doesn't even, like, personally, it may sound harsh, but it's like she hasn't particularly slipped through the net because we've engaged with her on multiple occasions. Like, and it's like, it's one of those, we will try and put in as much as we can, but you're always going to have patients that, for whatever reason, I'm not blaming a patient, but do you know what I mean? Like you say, you can't blame her for having like an increase in asthma or a reduction in mobility.
It's not your responsibility. You know, your responsibility as a clinician is to manage the scenario that's put in front of you. It's not to. You can't take care of every single patient to make sure.
Can't go around every time and give her the meds.
Otherwise you're going to go around to all 3,500 patients that are taking meds in your surgery and put them in their mouth.
Do more than 10,000 steps.
You'd be doing a lot of steps that
Actually,
day,
maybe that's a way of getting the steps in.
Maybe.
You know, we spoke about this a couple of weeks ago. You know, get the steps in, and also
always good for you.
Get the meds in.
True.
New service.
The walking delivery service.
Pharmacists. Welcome to the walking pharmacist.
I'm going to potentially get some more input on it today, because I've booked her in for the GP to speak to her today, and the GP's like requested some antibody bloods as well.
Okay.
And then we'll see what we take it from there. But yeah, just an interesting one.
It's an unfortunate one. I think it's like like I say, it's loads of different bits that isn't particularly anyone's fault. I think it's just like,
to me, it highlights again, and we've covered it 1,001 times, but it highlights there's an element of, when did you say she had it reduced down to weeklies?
So it was weekly from October 2022.
So it's been the best part of a year. So 8 months, 9 months.
Yeah.
Which means that she's had about 35 scripts since then. It's a difficult one, isn't it? Because no, actually, she wouldn't have about 35. She's ordering it monthly.
Yeah, like,
but
it's another thing of like, is the pharmacy sometimes given her the month with us given the weekly?
I think that to some extent goes back to what we were talking about a couple of weeks ago about the better communication between community pharmacy and general practice. Like that might be, you know, wouldn't that be opportunistic for the pharmacy to go, did you mean to do a week for this patient, or they're only getting a week, but they only come in every month. Is that right? That doesn't seem right. Like I don't know if that conversation has taken place, and it's just not been recorded anyway. I don't know. But to my mind, I remember speaking to Mike, who's our training lead, about say, you know, different bits of safety and stuff like that. And he was saying it's the Swiss cheese model, basically, isn't it? And the community pharmacy is almost the last line of defence, so to speak. It feels like it should have been caught somewhere along the line. The reducing the quantities down is your part of that whole process, and there are other bits in the process that either haven't happened or haven't happened quick enough or have happened. And, I mean, you can do all that you can do, but as David says, sometimes you just can't win. Do you know what I mean? It's one of those, and you can only do what you can do when we're pushed on time and resources, and what can be done in a, you know, that script that you signed for a week will have been one of probably 150 that you signed that day. Yeah,
it was like other people had, like, it wasn't just me issuing the script as well. There were like other people had been issuing the prescription after speaking to us. So I was like, everyone's sort of got the finger in it at some point. And it's just still.
It's a difficult one, isn't it? Because it's it's a complicated one that needs some untying and some looking into and a bit of conversation and a little bit of nuance and touch and understanding and all the rest of it. And if the patient seems like, you know, she's not being difficult, she's not entirely sure about what's going on either. Do you know what I mean? And so it's hard to, you know, if you've got 10 minutes trying to get that information and the patient's not entirely clear and you're not entirely clear, you can see how those things can happen. I guess at least it's been caught now before something really bad has happened to the person.
So lucky that it hasn't led to something more severe happening. I don't know how she's got this far kind of thing, because it scared me. It scares me when it's like overdue by 6 months maximum. This is like over a year. We've reduced it by, and she's still here, which is the main thing.
Yeah, absolutely. David,
yes,
do you want to give us your scenario?
It's sort of like one of the things. So it's like a little bit of a topic to go through. Really, I think it sparked like the other week. I was sort of I'd got a request from sort of like ENT. So for the listeners and Dan, the layperson. Nice second name, the layperson.
The layperson.
It was sort of like a request for like a nasal spray, like a nasal saline spray sort of thing. But just like quite generic, not like realistically anything, you know, particularly direct as what it is. It's basically like a nasal flush, a nasal rinse sort of thing.
Is this for, what would that be for?
So it'd be sort of like clearing your nostrils and stuff like this. Usually it's sort of like, sometimes you have it for like sinusitis-y sort of stuff. Yeah, congestion.
Right, help with breathing and stuff.
Yeah, sort of like, so if you've got like a consistently like runny nose maybe and things like this, or like a persistent cough that's usually caused by like a drip at the back of your throat, you know, if you've got like a snotty nose and it drips, makes you cough.
It's not necessarily like medicinal in a way though, is it? It's like, it's not got any like active drugs per se in it, it's just...
It's literally just salty water, really.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's one of those. It's sort of like, it got me thinking. Realistically, it's like with the NHS the way it is, obviously like underfunded, we would describe it as, I guess, because it's limited resources and things like this. It's just one of those. It's there isn't really anything we can prescribe for the nasal, like rinses and stuff like this. There is some nasal sprays, but unfortunately at the moment as well, they're out of stock. So then we have to be like, well, the only way to get anything is we have to sort of like push patients back to go buy over the counter. So it's sort of like, that is the other thing of like, how, like, I guess, how do you feel about like pushing things back for the over the counter?
So is this scenario, is that where you ended up, that you asked the patient to buy it over the counter?
Yeah, because so basically it's like I had to sort of say, I think I had like a medication request of like, oh, it's on this letter, and I think I just had to like put back, I basically said, unfortunately there isn't anything we can do. We'd have to refer the patient to go to the community pharmacy.
Well.
Yeah. So it's sort of one of those. Sometimes you just like literally hands are tied in every direction. One, I can't prescribe. I can prescribe one thing, and that's out of stock completely.
Yeah.
With all the brands, with all the stuff. So I just got no other option apart from to be like, you'll have to go and buy this, unfortunately. And it's sort of like, having that.
It's like bridging the gap of like, they can't understand why they can buy something but not get it prescribed. Like, I think sometimes people don't understand.
I do get that though.
Yeah.
Like, I understand like that thing of going, you know, if you're saying it's out of stock.
Yeah.
But I can buy it.
But you can buy it, and you go, well, it can't be out of stock. How is it? It's not out of stock, is it?
Yeah. It's
out of stock on prescription. But I can buy it.
Yeah.
Like that is confusing.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? You can see why people be confused. How much is a nasal spray?
I don't know the price of milk. No, I'm joking. Or nasal sprays.
David Foster makes so much money. He's completely out of touch with the common nasal spray user. And he doesn't know the cost of a nasal spray.
I also don't drink milk, so that's why I don't.
No, that's why you don't.
The price of it.
You know the cost of almond milk?
It's too expensive. That's
too expensive, mate.
Probably about 180.
180
down the Sainsbury's, but any other shops.
Branded stuff.
Oh, we're back on nasal spray. Sorry,
back on nasal sprays.
It can vary like from like £5 to £8 on brands and sizes and things. So can be quite like, you can get it like £4, £8 somewhere. Just depends. Go on Amazon, probably get it cheaper.
It's definitely, it's definitely one of those. It's not sort of.
It's not like 30p like a pack of paracetamol.
No, it's not cheap. Because they are sort of branded things and stuff like that. But it's sort of like, sometimes you do feel a bit harsh almost if you're like pushing patients back. But then again, like if you're getting that for £8, that's way cheaper than if you're paying for the prescription, which is like 10 quid.
That is an excellent
you
point.
You might as well just get it over the OTC.
That's a good point, because people get paracetamol prescribed, don't they? And then they're obviously paying for your item. But paracetamol's like...
Yeah.
It's probably the cheapest thing in a supermarket these days, isn't it?
Yeah. Absolute pennies.
I think it's maybe like the conversation to be had is like a lot of the times as well is like the price for the NHS for prescribing stuff like that is like, it's £5 for someone to purchase, which yes, a lot of times I know we're in a cost of living crisis, etc. But it's like if you're paying for that, if you're able to pay for that sort of medication and use that like once a month, comparing that to the cost to the NHS, it's like, right, okay, well you got that price, then you have to add like a couple of pounds at least for the dispensing fee that the pharmacist will do, plus the doctor's or the pharmacist's time in the GP surgery, plus the admin time of someone else going through it, and it's like you end up like paying about £15 for a £5 nasal spray or something like that. Like, they're not 100% don't quote me on the numbers.
No, we've quoted John now.
But it's,
I'm going to put a picture of your face.
Yeah.
And I'm going to put David Foster said, this is how much you got. No, but it's a good point. I think it's a funny one really, because I always think about this in the context of I know there's been a lot of talk at the moment about dental appointments and dentist treatments, and then all the dentists aren't taking on NHS patients.
Yeah.
I always think about it in the context of, and I'm looking at you, Leah, because you're also wearing glasses.
Yeah.
Stuff to do with opticians. Now, with the way that the health service works in this country, if you have certain ailments, it's covered under the NHS. If you have other ailments, it isn't covered under the NHS. So if you have bad eyesight, which covers me and Leah.
Yeah.
You sometimes wear glasses, and you wear them a bit funny on your head sometimes.
I do wear them at an old angle.
But you have to pay for the appointment, you have to pay for your glasses, you have to pay for the online, and it has repercussions in so much as I think my eyesight's on the cusp of not being able to drive without glasses. I think I'm at that point. And so I physically couldn't have a driver's license unless I paid for glasses. Whereas I've also got a bad knee. And the physio and the surgery to sort my knee and the recovery and all that sort of stuff, that's covered. Because it just happens to be my knee and not my eyes that's knackered.
I mean, why would you put glasses on your knee? But no,
I can't answer that right now. Not without my legal team present. But do you see what I mean? It's an interesting one with the way that the NHS is set up, and you're going, well, why are some things covered and other things aren't covered? And I completely get on a micro basis going, it's £4. Just buy it, because that's what I'd be like. I'll just buy it. Do you know what I mean? I wouldn't have even gone that far as to have phoned the surgery. I'd have just gone and bought it. Do you know what I mean? But I can understand why people would be like, why is that covered and that's not covered?
Definitely.
It's confusing.
I think sometimes as well when it's a chronic thing, like if they're going to be buying it every month, rather than like if it's like sinusitis that happens seasonally, where they only have to pay their amount in the season that it's bad, that can sometimes be a swayer of, okay, I'm happy to pay for it because it's not going to be a constant purchase. But if it's a thing that they need every single month, I think that does put a barrier up sometimes where they don't want to be told to pay for something every single month. A monthly subscription they don't want to pay for.
I guess we're in a funny place, aren't we, in this country, in the way that the health service has been, I suppose, less about how it actually works and more about how, as a society, we understand and think about the NHS as this kind of, I think certainly until recently, where the trust in the health service has dipped significantly, probably over maybe the last 5 years as much as anything else, but certainly over the last 10 years. That people see it as like a catch-all, like if you're unwell, you contact the NHS, they'll sort you out. Aren't we really lucky to have this thing where it doesn't matter what's up with you, where you are, when you are, you'll be able to get sorted out. And so I think as a society, culturally in this country, we certainly think about healthcare as being not as a free entity, but as a free at the point of contact entity. And so when you are then met with a cost,
it surprises you.
It feels weird, doesn't it? Even if when you start to think about it logically, and the justification, as you say, David, of it costs this much to the NHS, it's actually going to be cheaper if you just buy it. And ultimately, it's not. With the nasal spray, that's not a medicinal. There's no medical treatments. It's uncomfortable, so I'm going to do something. It can be very useful and stuff like that, definitely. But it's one of those that it can be purchased over the counter. So it's like, well, realistically, that's our guidance. Should be telling people to do it, but that is an awkward conversation to be like.
I'm not going to prescribe something that you can get for free, but then the cost of it to everyone else.
Yes.
Like, do you know what I mean? Society has to pick that cost up. And I think that's one of the things is like
you
a bit
sort of know where it's going to be more difficult of a conversation as well by like the area that you're working in as well. If people are not, like you say, the cost of living crisis is hitting places harder. That can be, you sort of feel terrible for saying.
Yeah.
I know it's a couple of quid to me, but it might not be.
Yeah, and I think it's an awkward position to put individuals in. As I say, it comes back down in a macro sense to that message being communicated better to people. People need. I think the way that the health service should work needs reframing in everyone's mind, and that is obviously a huge social and cultural shift for everyone to think differently about. The way that the health service has worked up until now is not sustainable. Not in the way the world is now. Not with the age profile of the country. Not with the amount of comorbidities that we've got. Not with the population of the country. It just isn't feasible. So we have to think about what are the things we're spending money on that really we don't need to spend money on, or the bill could be footed elsewhere, so that we can spend money on operations and proper treatment of people and proper mental health services for people and stuff. This is the thing, is like you go, for every single time that you prescribe, the NHS pays for nasal spray for someone, that reduces the opportunity for someone to go and see someone that did for something else that they can't pay for. Do you know what I mean? I think it's trying to think about it in those terms, trying to think about how we understand these things as a collective as opposed to on an individual basis. But it then comes down to people like yourselves, doesn't it, to have those conversations. I presume that must make you feel quite awkward.
It's a bit of an awkward.
Send a text instead. Just be like, you have to buy this. I'm so sorry.
Hide it behind your phone.
Always apologise at the end, like apologies for the inconvenience, but I cannot do anything else. Sorry. And if they then ring and want to speak to me more detail about it, then okay, I'm happy to talk to you. But I'm not going to say much different to what I've said on the text. I always just send a blank text, not like a template to say.
A blank one, just nothing.
No, like a sheet, like a text to say like
buy OTC. And
yeah.
No. I get what you mean. It's definitely it's worth having that conversation. I think it's worth people being mindful of just not just like nasal sprays. It's just anything that you can buy over the counter would realistically help. And do you know what I mean? It's sort of like you say, with the limited resources that the NHS has, I think it's like we need to look at things, and like you say, it isn't particularly sustainable. I don't think that's a wider conversation. But it's definitely one of those. I sort of think it is an awkward conversation. I wish it wasn't such an awkward conversation of this is, but it's definitely one I feel awkward about. It's like, this is something you could buy.
Would it be feasible? I don't know if this even exists, or would it be possible for it to exist that are just set items? I know the CCGs in different areas, or the places now set out items that they want to be de-prescribed because they could be bought over the counter. If there was there must be certain items that nationally, the way we have like the rag system for stuff, that you can rag certain things and saying, look, these things are always over the counter. These things are over the counter in certain scenarios, and then most of the time they won't be over the counter, but sometimes they can be. So people understand from the outset, if you're asking for these things, you're gonna be asked to buy them, because that's how they work. That might be an easier way, proactively meeting these things head on.
I think it'd be a good system. I just think it's one of those things that sometimes feels like a bit of a losing battle, because like if I say no, someone else will just say yes. And it's like
everyone needs to be on the same page with it.
It's sort of one of those.
It takes a bit of commitment as well, doesn't it? It
100%.
takes, and again, that's hard because everyone's worn out. And so at some point, if you keep pushing, someone will say because they'll go, oh, sod it, just whatever.
It'd be easier. And they'll give you glasses for your knee.
Yes. And that's why I can't see or walk.
Just falling apart.
Quite literally, Leah. I am falling apart at my age as well.
Glass knees.
You know what I mean? And on that note, I'll wrap up. David, Leah, thank you very much for your time and for your thoughts, as usual. And thanks to you, the listener, for joining us. As always, the podcast is brought to you in association with the My Pharmacist team app, the UK's first peer-to-peer support app for GP pharmacists, trainee pharmacists, and pharmacy technicians. We'll be back with another episode next week. In the meantime, you can find out more about My Pharmacist team by going to the website, which is www.mypharmacistteam.co.uk, or you can check us out on the many social media channels that we use. One question I was going to ask, Lou, I'm breaking the fourth wall now. Are we going to get on? Are we going to get mad on Threads? Is that what we're going to do?
I've already suggested. Should we get on that?
I started the account. This is in the episode now.
Wow.
I started the account because I wanted to see what was going on with Threads.
Yeah.
I reckon we get mad on Threads.
Yeah.
That's what I think we should do.
It's one of the
Big
popular things at the minute that we should. If
Yeah,
there's a
hop on
market for it.
board.
Do we have a blue tick?
No.
Well, especially
not?
since like the Twitter's gone a bit dead.
Twitter's.
Is it?
It's not where
I've
it's
heard
at.
you can freely speak on there.
No.
No.
Only if you're a right-wing activist. Then you're allowed.
Right, definitely not
No.
that.
No. Anyway, let's wrap
Just
up.
clear that up.
But Threads, see you on Threads soon, listeners. We'll have some excellent threads for you on Threads. Yeah.
Not threadbare like
No.
your banter.
Like this. Let's not pull at this thread any longer. We'll be back next week. Thank you very much for listening.